One of the great things about the Global Housing Foundation is the very first word, global. The perspective that is only possible when we get input from all corners of the world. Things happening in one place might have influence in another. And this is such a unique organization able to call upon experts around the world in order to solve problems in other parts of the world. Zaigham Rizvi is one of the leading consultants in the world of affordable housing and renewable energy and the way they combat with each other, as well as the financing aspects of this, because if we can't afford to build these things, they're never going to get built. So he especially has a perspective based on his many years of work in Asia. Taking the lessons from that part of the world and helping through working with the World Bank, the Global Housing Foundation, and others to take the lessons learned in that part of the world and thankfully spread them elsewhere. Mr. Rizvi, you're going to describe to us a little bit about some of the work that you have been doing and some of the lessons that you have been learning, some of which focus on the Asian experience, but we hope have implications all around the world. Please share that with us if you would.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm really honored to be invited by the Global Housing Foundation to this event, and where wisdom sharing will be done by different stakeholders from all over the world. And I'm impressed that my experience for last year was very good. Today, I'll be talking about the affordable housing models based on some of the Asian practices, taking the example of the affordable housing program initiatives taken in Pakistan and giving cross references to the regional countries like India has done some of the good thing. Indonesia has very successfully launched a project and done it. Turkey in Turkey. So I'll be talking and giving examples, and at the end, I would like to recommend that we should facilitate some wisdom sharing of the best practice examples between the region. So I will start with my presentation. Very thanks again for inviting me. The whole issue is that the area of the world is the same, but the people living on this world are increasing. Like in the beginning of the 19th century, we had 2 billion, middle of the 19th century, about 1974, 4 billion. Today is about 8 billion people. So you can imagine this food, clothing, and shelter, the basic social needs are increasing. Per capita consumption is increasing, but the land which has to provide is the same amount. So what we really need to understand is that the challenge of making the productivity of land in terms of housing, productivity of land in terms of food, and of course, clothing. So when we talk of productivity of land, I gave you the example of Pakistan. Pakistan in 1970 had a population of about 58 million people, meaning about 66 persons per square kilometer population density. Then it moved to today it's about 230 million people, which means about more than 250 persons per square kilometer, 266. And by another 30 years from now, it will be having a population density of 430 persons per square kilometer, meaning 1971, if one person was to be fed by a certain area of land, 4 times today and 8 times 30 years from now. So meaning the same land 4 times today and 8. So what we have to really do is, when we talk of in terms of housing, that we have to really work of better affordable housing with much superior and efficient use of the land. And that's where you see, I say that housing is in Asia, particularly because I'll be talking of Asia, giving some example of Pakistan. Minus China, Asia is 1/4 of the world population, including Pakistan. Minus China is 1/4, including China is about half of the world population. And about 1/4 of the people are poor in this segment. So when we talk of affordable housing issue, we have seen in the past that there have been slogans and all that, but delivery is literally none. So Asian snapshot, as I said, that awareness is moving, but solutions are not there. So what I really see is, So what we really see is that Singapore offers us one of the best examples. 1965, Singapore got independence, and you see on side of the picture, it was one of the worst slums of the world. Today, it is one of the best organized city-state of the world. So meaning if the housing issue is addressed in a very systematic manner, the models given by the Lee Kuan Yew, the leader of Singapore, one thing he did was the town plan, the master plan of Singapore, and he said, master plan of Singapore is the Bible of Singapore. Nobody dare touch it. In most of the countries, we find that this is coming out because the master plans of the cities, due to massive urbanization and growing population and all that, are really totally disregarded. So what we really need to do is affordable housing. When we say that population is increasing, household size are shrinking, like in case of Pakistan, we see that Pakistan, we had population, and I'm telling you, increasing to 6.5 persons per household size, and which means that last year the population growth was about 4.8 million net population growth, meaning 0.7 million leave the house. So what we need to do is that we need to really enhance the need of the housing because of the massive population growth and also the shrinking land, because the land is being by industries, land is being used by cities, and land is being used by the land for agriculture purposes, because more population is to be fed. So what we really need to understand is that population density is very important for us to address, and how do we move that, meaning make land more efficient, high rise. And the slums, particularly in, for example, in Mumbai, India, more than 50% of the population in Mumbai, India is slums. Karachi is the same, 24 million people, more than half of the population is living in slums. Slums are the most inefficient use of the land, where we need to really redevelop the slums so that efficient use of the land could be there. So what we really need to do is that in the past, slogans were there, some housing was being used by the for the political slogan, but deliveries were not there. In Pakistan, the Prime Minister, ex-Prime Minister, developed a very massive program. He developed a task force for developing the housing policies and programs, which is very essential that an independent entity should be there, which could not be influenced by any other forces to develop the housing program. Execution has to be a separate model where the separate entity, but the policy and she would like to ensure that government could play the role of enabler and facilitator, but execution has to be done in the private sector. So in Indian case, the Prime Minister Modi announced the Housing for All program, which in Indian language called the Prime Minister Awas Yojana. And in Malaysia, in Indonesia, there was a program in 1915 or so. This is Housing for All, targeting 1 million people. So they were the people who are really done some success. At least where, and at the end of my presentation, I will say that how can we learn from each country's success stories. Yes, now what is housing is when we talk of housing, at times we talk of total housing, but we have to understand in our part of the world, the rural areas are having different challenge. Peri-urban areas, which are practically the slums, have an entirely different area, and peri-urban areas are being developed because of the massive urbanization. So there's lands are the most inefficiently used there, where if we could redevelop the slums, we could really make more efficient use of the land and make very big high rising. What we call the program is slum redevelopment programs. In India, with the technical systems and of the IFC in 2 cities, Orissa and Bihar, they have redeveloped the slums, and they have made high rise where the people could get much better housing, and more housing was available. So the housing cost was properly recovered by selling those extra housing, which was really generated by efficient use of the land. Hernando de Soto, in his book Mystery of Capital, said the same thing. In slums, the people are living on the land which is worth billions of dollars, but it's of no use to them and no use to the society because the slums are the most inefficient use of the land. So we need to understand there are stakeholders of the housing. I have in the list, which right from the government to the private sector to academia and all that. When we develop a housing program, we have to really, let me see. Yeah, sorry. So when we really do the housing, we have to really try to develop a mechanism where these stakeholders efficiently cooperate with each other. Otherwise, the time consumed in the coordination and getting approval sometimes take months, only sometimes years. So what happens is that due to inflationary aspect, a program which was conceived 3 or 4 years before had a cost which was to be affordable. Because of the delay by approval process by different stakeholders, its cost has gone up. So the developers cannot deliver it, beneficiaries cannot benefit. So we have to really develop, and in many parts of the world, digital platforms are really helping them out. So then I would say that when we talk of the housing, as I said, the 3 stakeholders. One is the supply side, meaning the developer industry. They have to be developed and facilitated in a different manner. And then is the finance side, meaning the banking institution and all that. And then last is the regulatory side, like the FAR ratios and floor area ratio, floor space index. Because, for example, as a large habitat is being developed, we have to build in within the habitat what we call the smart subsidies and cross subsidies. Cross subsidies are if there is a 5% area, we could give commercial area, we could give to the developer 10% so that he could make more money, because commercial areas need not to be affordable. They have to be, and the whole housing habitat cannot be all low income housing. We have to have, let's say 25-30% low income, then middle income and high income. So the value of the commercial habitat will be only improving if the habitat is really having a good model for that. So this, okay. So what we really feel is that policies, execution side, all that, and the regulatory side. This slide I have a little bit discussed. In the interest of time, I'll move. Most important thing is the real estate regulatory agencies, meaning the developers have to be private sector, but they need to be monitored, controlled, and regulated. What we call is a developer would solicit public money, and the basic rule is when you solicit public money, you need to be regulated. In many countries of our region, the construction industry and the developer supply side is not regulated, for which a standard word is regulatory name is Real Estate Regulatory Authority. India has got it, Pakistan has now recently got it. So those countries which have got the Real Estate Regulatory Authority will be making sure that the delivery of from the developer is the promise delivered is promised as was made, which is very, very important, because otherwise, the delays by the developer, the cost goes up and the people suffer a lot. So this is one of the things we need to really. So model, as we all know, that housing, when we talk as the private public partnership, where the government builds housing for its own people, government employees, then private public partnership, where the land is provided by the government and the private sector comes in. These are the model, and the most common and most voluminous model would be always private partnership, where the people coming with the land would join hands with the people who have money and developers, and they develop. For example, in India, the program of housing, affordable housing for all, says that a housing which will be developing about 1/4 in low income segment, and low income segment is defined by the area and the income. For example, they are saying 550 square feet or 650 square feet is the low income housing defined. So if 1/4 is developed by a developer, then he gets all these incentives, right, which I said, the finance side incentive, the construction material industry incentives are given to that developer, and the rest of the 75% he is free to make middle income and high income. And this is where he can also develop what we earlier said is the cross subsidy model. smart subsidy models,
Mr.
as I
Mr.
said.
Mr. Rizvi, let me ask you this, if I might. Among the various shareholders that you have mentioned, let's talk about the residents of these housing units that you have been describing. How important is it, and how difficult is it to get a commitment from the residents to maintain the housing, to participate to the degree that they're required to live up to their own financial obligations? How tough a part of the equation is that?
Yeah, this is absolutely is an answer which, like in America, you have given an answer to what we call homeowners association. You know, they have HOAs, have the stipulation that you have to do this, and anybody violates that, his electricity is cut off, his water is cut off. Oh, but there are many ways of controlling and bringing in the discipline. So what we are trying to do in our part of the world, and your question is very valid, to bring them under discipline, but where the gated community and specific habitat, that we make them obliged to agree that they will be following these stipulations, and failing which initial punishment will be that water will be cancelled or electricity, and then the houses could also be taken back. But the moment the basic supplies are cut off, punished, the house has no value. So I think these are the stipulations, but in our part of the world, really enforcing those are not that easy. Because the judiciary and legal system say human rights, basic rights, and all that. But yes, as I said, basically HOA's concept in a different legal language, we are trying to have it.
I see.
So,
I see. Very interesting.
Yeah. Then there's market segment. As I said, the market housing, which is high end. You don't need to talk about them because they don't need to come to me for affordability issue. They can afford. But then is this social housing, which we call the lower middle and the low income segment. And also we have the segment which is, we call it the very low income, where the people looking in slums. So these are the areas, like we call in our language, India and Pakistan, and the part economically weaker segments of the society. So they need the government economic empowerment. So they need certain incentives in terms of subsidies and all that. You cannot provide subsidies, because subsidies are not small subsidies, they are very massive. Yeah. So then affordability is simple word I define is that affordability, you know, in our part of the world is about 1/3 of the cost of the housing is the mortgage should be no more than 1/3 of the income of the person, gross income. And the cost of the house, it should be about 5 to 6 years, been 60 to 70 months income gross should be equal to the cost of the house. But in our part of the world, having said is easier than done, because inflation and all those are so high that the incomes don't match the rising inflation. So this ratios, which are generally called ratios of 5 or 6 years gross income, or 1/3 of your monthly income, should not be the more than the mortgage payment. But yes, it's maintaining that, and this is where we see the government subsidies and economics empowerment comes in. I'll talk later. You see, what government could do is, for example, there's a land is one of the basic mother of the whole housing. So when a developer has a land, external infrastructure is provided by the state. That makes a lot of sense, and it reduces the cost of the housing. So let me see affordability as it defined. Yeah, this is one definition of affordability. This is, you know, house in Mumbai, which is value. This house is valued to, at the moment, about more than $2 billion. But I always say in my slide is this house is affordable because Mr. Ambani can afford it. That's the high end of the population. This is a huge house, as we read, is about 27 stories building. Now the another part of the affordability. This is it, affordability. You see, in Hong Kong, there is a cage housing. And this man, I was reading an article, has almost spent all his life in this cage. So this is a different aspect of affordability. So when we really address the issue of affordability, we have to go and see the local conditions. And we have to really understand is that whatever state could do, economic empowerment has to come in from the state. And now the housing approach I have discussed a bit in the interest of time, but I would say that supply side, the government has to relax, meaning many high-rise, rather than ground plus 3 or 4, in certain areas ground per 10 or 12 or maybe more. But in low income segment, there's another issue is that when you make more, the low income segment has to be really disciplined to maintain, as your early question was, to maintain the discipline. Ground plus 3, 4, you can do it without elevator. But ground plus 10, 12, you need elevators as well. So that's, and also, if you honestly do the very high rise, which apparently it seems like that I am distributing the cost of the land to more number of housing units, so it will be making more affordable. But at the same time, construction cost goes very high, because when you make it more high rise, the construction has to be much more stronger. So it's cost. You're always a catch between the two, but things are moving. As in one of the earlier presentation, he was talking of 3D technology, is the construction technology, construction materials technology.
Well, I'm glad, Mr. Rizvi, that you brought that up, because as our program today continues, we're going to be hearing from several innovative ideas that are not only proposals, but are actually being undertaken in other parts of the world. From what I'm taking from your presentation, sir, it sounds like we really do have to depend on multiple stakeholders at once, whether that be the real estate developers, the local governments, the funders from outside, as well as the residents themselves. And I thank you so much for that presentation.
Thank you. I would like to add one thing. The last slide I was asking that if UN Habitat, Global Housing Foundation, that's the last slide. Let's see. The Global Housing Foundation would really help us out. And we have a seminar where the best practice examples, where, for example, in Mumbai, the slum redevelopment one-man model, in the housing model, Indonesian model. So we have, every country has 1 or 2 or 3 best practice examples. So I was recommending that if the UN Habitat could really this is my recommendation, that they could really facilitate a webinar where the speakers from India, from Bangladesh, from Thailand, from Vietnam, from Pakistan would proudly present what they have done. And then we develop one-to-one collaboration between them. Then I think the wisdom sharing is very much possible. And I have done to facilitate, I have also launched this housing information portfolio, ACASH, Advisory Center for Affordable. This is a free of cost, people can visit, but India has, housing has, Bangladesh has. So because the research and wisdom sharing and what the other countries are, for example, India has done a very good job in rural housing, very successful model. And maybe in Pakistan or Bangladesh is probably more candidate for the rural housing. So they probably could learn what a successful example is offering. So I think this people can have the link. And also I would request Global Housing Foundation, and then I've also requested the same to the ambassador, if we could have some wisdom sharing where we have Mexico, we have Brazil, some best practice example for the low income housing and slum redevelopment projects.
All right. Zaigham Rizvi, thank you very much for joining us today. Appreciate your perspective from Asia in the trenches of providing affordable and sustainable housing. Good of you to be with us today, sir. Thank you very much.
I am honored to be associated with Global Housing Foundation as an ambassador. Thank you, sir.
Great. Terrific. Thank you. Thank you as well.